Today, I'll show you how to gap a spark plug using a filler gauge. Don't worry, it's a very simple task that anyone who has the right tools will be able to get right the first time in a matter of minutes. I'll leave a link in both the comments and description below to all I'll be using in this video so that you can go check them out if you wish. First things first, to gap a spark plug right using a filler gauge, you need 4 things. 1. The spark plug you are interested in setting the gap right. A filler gauge, reference material for the right gap the spark plug should be. The internet can easily come in as a substitute if you don't have this. And finally, a hard material like a hammer. Don't worry, I'll show you why this is important in a moment. To set the gap of your spark plug right, first determine the correct gap your spark plug ought to have as determined by your vehicle manufacturer. This gap is the total distance from the center electrode to the side electrode, the total distance the spark must travel before it ignites compressed air fuel mixtures in your cylinder. If this gap is wider than the recommended value, you risk having your vehicle misfire during load or acceleration, as a wider gap requires higher voltage to ionize the air fuel mixture. On the other hand, if the gap is narrower than the recommendation, your vehicle will experience incomplete combustion and flame quenching. This is because a narrow gap creates a smaller, weaker spark, which may not ignite the air fuel mixture efficiently. The direct consequence: reduced power, poor acceleration, excessive plug fouling, and rough idling. This is why the gapping needs to be just right for your vehicle to run efficiently. The right gap for your spark plugs will be available in the repair manual of your vehicle or freely available online. For my case, I have the repair manual of my Honda 50 Super Cup, and here's the right gap, 0.7 mm. Armed with the ideal spark gap of your plugs, you will be able to adjust things accordingly, either adding or reducing the gap as needed. Remember, by gap, I mean the total distance between the center and side electrodes. Swiping out your filler gauge, locate the leaf that corresponds to the recommended gap distance and gently try and see if the filler gauge will slide through. If the right leaf of the filler gauge can't get into the gap between the center and side electrode of your spark plug, it means the gap is too narrow and must be adjusted to the recommended value. To open up this gap, use a needle nose plier on the side electrode and gently pry upwards. Be careful not to touch or damage the center electrode, especially if you are dealing with an iridium teeth spark plug. Run this prying upwards gently and incrementally, trying the filler gauge after each attempt until you get the right size. On the other hand, if the gap between the side and center electrode is wider than the recommended value, you will need to close this up. This is where the hammer I mentioned a while ago comes in. Gently tap the side electrode like so and test after each light tap. Do not go overboard, or worse, make the mistake of hammering things down. You simply destroy the entire spark plug. That said, you can easily use any other hard metal for this purpose, provided it isn't painted and will resist the light taps. Irrespective of whether the gap between the side and center electrode is too wide or too narrow, you need to test again after several adjustment attempts you'll be making to get the gap to the recommended value. Ideally, the right leaf of the filler gauge, the one that holds the recommended value of your spark plug gap, should go into the spark plug gap with some resistance, but should go in nonetheless. If it goes in too freely, you haven't yet got the gap in right, and if it doesn't go in at all, the gap is still way too small. Keep trying till you get everything nice, tight, and snug. As you've seen, the process of gapping a spark plug using a filler gauge is simple and straight to the point. Once you have a filler gauge and know the values your spark plug ought to be gapped at. Good luck with the process. If you enjoyed this concise video, consider subscribing to the channel so that you never miss another video. Catch ya on the next one.